Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320, as well as WFHR.com on the web, and we also welcome our friends from River Cities Media who are digitally recording our session this morning, and for those of you who are watching on TV, no, the flowers are not for the mayor or for me, that's for Tammy from the Good Morning Show from her husband, so she left him there. So hey, it's a nice prop for the TV.
They look nice.
Yeah, we welcome the Mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. He's here for the entire hour this morning. Your chance to talk to City Hall and your mayor at 424-2600 or pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. With that, we welcome Mayor Vruwink, and wow, it's amazing when people get active, start calling their alderpersons. What happens? The council changed its mind about Aspirus.
Well, good morning, Carl, and thank you for having me again this month. And I welcome those that are listening and invite those callers to call in. Last night's council was council chambers were another packed house again, back-to-back months. Obviously, the most pressing issue in front of most people's minds at the council meeting both nights was the request for annexation and rezoning of the property that Aspirus had proposed their expansion to occur on. And to your point, I think I had gotten a lot of the carbon copy emails and letters that people had sent to the council members, and Alderperson Kirkpatrick obviously was the most passionate about it. Right at the end of the last council meeting, he had made a motion to renew the petition for annexation, which is completely legitimate in the period of the period of time, the 3 months, essentially that the city has to act on annexation petitions. So he made the request to renew the annexation petition, and it came up at this month's meeting. Obviously, he must have felt a degree of confidence between the last meeting and this now meeting that the picture was different than it was the previous month. And up until last night's meeting, frankly, I had not straw polled to see where the issue would have been. I mean, as a chair of the meeting, the council ultimately makes the decisions. And in this case, whether there's a tie, and there wouldn't be a tie because it requires a supermajority, I didn't really have much of a role to play other than play chair. So, and obviously to lead the council in that regard.
Alderperson Hepp was the one that changed his vote.
Right.
And what was the final count?
The 6-2 that was required for passage.
6-2.
Yeah, on that particular issue. The other two issues related to that were simple majorities. And I think let's take a moment though to talk about why this was in front of the city in the first place. In many respects, it was in front of the city because of a technicality that this happened to be an island related to the annexation, an island that had not been annexed to the city previously. It is one of the few islands that remains, but many wonder, and the state wonders why those islands still remain. They're legal, but by a
they don't
majority,
make sense.
They don't make sense. I mean, in this case, the city services completely surround the subject parcel, which is the parcel that we're talking to the south of the existing Aspirus Doctors Clinic, and bordered to Chestnut to the south. So the question in front of the council last night, and was the annexation appropriate? Was the city, is it appropriate to be in the city? And by what the state has told the petitioner, which is Aspirus, and property owners, that yes, it makes sense. And I don't know if anybody would dispute that fact. The challenge is in Wisconsin statute that you do need a supermajority for those votes to occur and to pass. So, I think from a standpoint of developable land, many would have questioned why it was never in the city previously. And I would suggest that some of these pieces, and the property owners, I've told the property owners in this case, you should never let your land wait for a developer and then at the whim of the city council for their approval. Because oftentimes it's the end use is going to cloud the decision surrounding annexation, that regardless if somebody believes the annexation is appropriate, they will decide based on the ultimate use, and that was the case, particularly with one of the dissenters last night, with I think Alderperson Rayom, who said he opposes the annexation, and he opposes the annexation simply because of the ultimate proposed use of the land, which is entirely fine. It's just that it doesn't make sense. To me, it does not, and and so I think that was the one piece. And obviously, there are two other questions. And when I say technically, it was on the city, in front of the city on a technicality. If the land was in the city, this would not have come to the body. It would have been zoned to something, and the comprehensive plan actually called for a use that was consistent with the council action last night, which was the R2. When a piece of property is annexed to the city, it always comes in as R2, which is 1 and 2 family residential homes, which the comprehensive plan actually called for something similar to the B5 business use, the general mixed use district. So, I think if people question the council action one way or the other, the annexation question was a quasi-judicial. Did the council feel that this is appropriate for this to be in the city? On the rezoning question, what's a comprehensive plan show? If the land is in the city, what is the zoning that should be applied? And really, if the land was in the city and the zoning was there, the only question for the city could have been a site plan review, and maybe there was been a CSM assignment related to when you combine parcels of land together. In this case, there's a couple of different owners involved with the property. It isn't just one owner. And then the conditional use. What sort of conditions should the council do or put on something to protect the safety and welfare of its residents? And there were some conditions related to a stoplight, conditions related to we talked about some natural barriers that buffers, if you will, around residential parcels and access, limiting access. So those were the conditions that had been previously discussed. So, I think back prior to emotion, prior to a lot of the fact and I would say opinions and myth and everything else that came out as a result of this question for the city council, that the city council really is acting in a quasi-judicial manner. And those are the questions in front of it. It's not whether or not we think community can support a particular business or if there's a market for it.
Well, that's what free enterprise is about. Well, the market will determine that.
Yeah. So I recognize it's a very difficult issue, and it's a difficult issue for me to represent the city, who frankly has two very different groups. If they have a position or an opinion on the matter, I think there's a lot of people still questioning in the middle. Both sides. What are you exposing as fact? What are you saying that may not be quite that? And I think ultimately the city's role is quasi-judicial. But I would take it a step further to talk about what are the deficiencies. Clearly we had a requester that saw a deficiency in the market or an opportunity, if you will. And I question to what extent is city government or any governmental body, in this case because of a technicality, should they thrust themselves in the middle? We had to be in the middle of this one, and quite frankly, I wish we weren't, because it really brought out the fact that the city government had to decide whether this was appropriate.
Yeah, when you're trying to attract business to your community, you don't want to be in the role of picking winners. You want to go, okay, here are the rules for operating a business in our community. Here's the people you need to contact. You try and make it as easy and accessible and quick as possible, and then you say, welcome. Good luck.
Yeah, right. And ultimately, they're making the investment, right?
That's right. They're the one that's making.
If we had incentives in, or if we had an agreement in where there were public funds, transferred, which is not the case with this such development. And there, I don't know if we've had maybe one in the last 2 years that was already in the city, but we didn't have any skin in the game, particularly related to this. So it wasn't something that we were incentivizing or promoting. And some people have unfairly said that I've been promoting this. Well, frankly, my job is to look at these situations and to give a judicial kind of review of it. And the council, that's their role. And like I said, I don't have a vote specifically related to the council. I did on the planning commission. And the questions were the same for the planning commission. Is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? Is the annexation appropriate? And of course they are. And there's no disputing that. The disputes come into whether or not the business operations can be sustained in the community.
But that's not for the city to for a governmental body to determine. The market, the business will determine that.
That's right.
They've obviously have made a calculation and their business plan and the development of their long-term plan that there's a niche in this market that they can serve, and that's what they are going to do.
That's right. And when you think about the community, while the city is a city of 18,000, think 500 and something now, actually a little bit larger than the numbers on the sign, based on the state's numbers. We are really a community of 45, 50,000 people, and those are the people that that all the fast food restaurants, all the retail stores, that's the market opportunity for somebody. And when somebody looks at the market, whether it's healthcare or retail, we'll talk about retail in a little bit with a retail store that's going to be located in the city. When they look at the demographics and the numbers,
they look at the whole region.
Correct. They draw these rings of where they can draw from, and I'm not going to stand in somebody's way and contradict and say, well, no, you cannot. They're not going to drive. They're not going to spend, or they're not going to choose to operate. But I think the reality exists that people that support one institution or another have a relationship with that institution, or a relationship with that doctor in this case. And if they have a relationship with that doctor, they obviously trust that doctor. And who's to say that somebody else can't have a relationship with a particular institution?
For full disclosure, my personal physician is Dr. Robert Reynes at Aspirus. He's been my personal physician for many, many years. I like him because he deals with guys like me who have white coat syndrome.
Okay. All right. There you go.
I've had a very good relationship with him.
Sure.
I would not want to end that relationship because that's a very important relationship, the one you have with a physician. So I could understand people's emotions about this. But from a strictly city standpoint, this is a business that says we have land, we would like to expand our current business, but we need to annex a small, unfortunately, you have an island here, and can we do that?
Right. How do we approach that? I think Alderperson Hilke stated too, in a very positive way, that institutions, regardless if they're in the medical institution or whatever industry, they will always find a way to remain competitive. And unfortunately, duplication of services was brought out, and people can play that card one way or the other. And the fact of life is that duplication does exist. I mean, I'm in the IT business, and I own that company yet, and I don't know how many other IT businesses there are that compete for the same market share in this community.
How many hamburger places do we have?
So I think Hilke's comment is very very important to highlight. Is there are assets and there are differences, and people have their strengths in this community, and they're always going to have their strengths. How they respond and how they stay viable is up to them. They control their own destiny, and if they make financially sound decisions, if they make decisions that are in the best interest of their customers or their payers or their patients or whoever you want to talk about, whichever industry, they will remain viable. And frankly, and every time that the cliche is, and every door closes, another door opens, and I don't think that's untrue in this situation either.
And what's Aspirus' plans now that this has been approved? Have they said?
I don't have my timeline directly in front of me, but I believe they're going to present the Plan Commission and some others with a site plan review, and I can't remember if there's a timeline that they've shared with us on that particular piece, but I believe a 2017 opening, so it's not happening tomorrow. They're not breaking ground in this year. Obviously, we're heading into fall, so there is some time off on that.
I would imagine the groundbreaking probably won't happen until next
sometime
spring
late 15. Yeah. That was what if I recall, specific. On kind of general terms, it was a 15 fall construction start.
Looking forward, should we be looking at a plan or addressing these islands that we have remaining in the city?
Well, they have to, under state law, be driven by the owner under a petition basis. There are some pieces of land. In fact, last month the council gave me authority to pursue annexation of some land that the city owns, which happens to be in the town of Grand Rapids. It's really strange. We won't question it, but it's actually in the nearby vicinity to this parcel, off of Saratoga Street, connected somewhat to the Woodlands Business Park. For one reason or another, when the city purchased the land, it just remained in the town. There was another annexation request that actually was approved last night too, through the Planning Commission, for a single-family home. The water supply and the sewer septic system was no longer meeting their needs, and so they were very pleased to get on city services in that regard. But to your point, there is a larger conversation regarding a boundary agreement, and I'd suspect Mr. Clendenning is listening from the town of Grand Rapids, and maybe others from the town. The county, I think, really can play a role in that. They obviously have an interest in, they have a tax base, obviously, to grow, as do both entities, the town and the city, but they can play a role in facilitating that dialogue. Because the solution isn't one-sided, that the city should just provide city services to the town, because to what extent does the city ratepayer and taxpayer benefit from that? So we want to protect those that have invested in the system and the infrastructure over the years of existence. So as it relates to dealing with these islands and fingers, I mean, whatever you want to call them, they're interesting when you look at them, and it's interesting to even a greater extent as to how and why the state has allowed these things to go through.
That's my other question. Normally, the state does not like islands, and like when you petition for annexations or the like, they go, hold it a minute. Somehow or other,
the rest have to come in, and those are the most contentious, right? Because
right.
You've got objectors that don't want to be annexed, and oftentimes those are the ones that remain in the towns or in a village if it's an annexation the other way. So it's and I think because it's administrative review, right? Down in Madison, they look at these. They've got how many jurisdictions from all 72 counties that happen, and what jurisdiction it is. Well, it's what the requester wants, right? It's not what the state should tell them. So I think there's a balance to be struck. But this has been an eye-opening experience. Regardless of what people think of the council as a result, or even myself, I expect people to continue to respect the body and the city council's decision, regardless of whether or not they voted one way or another previously and change their vote or not. These people are elected to serve, and they're elected to review these requests and not to forget that these requests are at the core a quasi-judicial request, and we can't forget that. So, but I do thank all the people that have gotten involved and shared their perspective. I mean, there was people that not only stood up last night, but many conversations that I had offline, whether it was with leadership at Riverview, leadership at Aspirus, or people that had been not economically connected with either institution, but had an objective opinion as well. This really brought out public opinion probably to the greatest extent that I've seen since I've taken office, and I'm appreciative that people have shared their opinions.
And I think it shows again, don't take things for granted. Proponents of this, I think, assumed that it was going to go through no problem.
Right.
And then they were shocked with the original rejection. Right. I think we've all learned a lesson. If you are in favor of something that's before the Common Council, be willing to speak up.
That's right. It
Don't
doesn't
take
have
it for
to be
granted.
assuring, as just, you're doing a great job. It can be, I support this and here's why. And I think all of us that are elected officials, whether it's on the council or myself, appreciate when people do take the time. I mean, whether or not we have the time to respond that moment or as some council members don't respond, and I don't understand the strategy there, that's their decision. But they're obviously accountable to the electorate and to the residents that elect them in their particular district. But to your point, absolutely, no matter what issue, big or small, it's important to hear from residents on their opinion on it.
If you're just joining us on the Morning Magazine, welcome. We're getting our monthly City Hall update. Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for the entire show. And our phone line is open at 715-424-2600, pound 1320 on your U.S. cellular phone. Other items of interest from last night's Common Council meeting that people may have missed, or especially after the Aspirus item, they might have left probably.
Yeah, a few other small pieces of business. There were a couple of rezoning actually related to the business that it's expanding behind Ace Hardware. That happened. The council approved another fall carnival, or a carnival. It's coming this fall with the Chamber of Commerce leading the charge on that in September. There was some other pieces related to a conversation regarding safe routes to school and sidewalks, and it's been a long drawn out process, unfortunately, and because of the timing of when the bids and the work would be completed, our understanding was going to happen this fall. Contractors were not able to squeeze it into their schedule, and so there was a throw-in bid, and it was way high. So the sidewalks that were planned to be installed near Washington School will not be installed this fall unless something else changes. But everything we're aware of now, that's not going to happen this year. So people that
so it's going to be rebid?
It'll be rebid in the spring, correct, and then they'll happen at some point. I'd expect that work would begin right away in the spring because we're that much further ahead of the game for 15, really. But unfortunately, it's not going to happen this year. And I know the school and property owners and everybody, it's been a drawn-out process for them. And so unfortunately, that's going to have to wait until 2015. The bid came in twice as much, and it was, again, a throw-in bid. So whether or not they thought they were qualified or not, if it was going to be a low qualified bid, but because it was outside the state's expenditures for, they were going to reject the bid for that item, which is the case. Other projects, I mean, there were some other pieces related to 17th Avenue. There was some work related to public works, but pretty straightforward council meeting last night. They did re-elect Joe Kazicki to the Waterworks and Lighting Commission.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there was only he was the only person that expressed interest, and I think people need to pay attention to if they want to serve on Waterworks and Lighting. There is a opportunity that every year somebody comes up on that commission if people want to serve or want to see someone different serve on that commission.
We have our first call of the morning, Your Honor, so let's get right to the phones. Good morning, you're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink.
I have a question for the mayor.
And he's on the line, so go right ahead.
Okay, I'm talking in regard to Alderman Rayon's diatribe that he gave. In that, he said that I don't care if I get 100 calls against something if I feel it's the other way, I'm going to vote that way. And I'd like the mayor's opinion on this. I'll listen on the air.
Sure. Thanks for the call.
Okay, that goes to the kind of a debate about representative democracy. I mean,
Correct.
we elect people to represent us, but does that mean they always have to bow to our wishes?
Well, in short, these individuals are represented by district, and if they're in his district, if this gentleman lives in his district or not, but he's bringing the point, and I think it's an important point to point out, technically they do not have to vote the way their district feels. I mean, if they did a popular vote, a referendum, that's a different story, but these individuals are elected by their district and then to make decisions on behalf of the city as a whole. So that might be a little bit confusing to some people, but it really comes down to that particular individual and their opinion on the matter. Now, to the caller's point, specific to Rayom's point, if I get far more negative calls than I get positive calls, I think he needs to reevaluate his mechanism which he makes decisions. And I've heard time and time again from people in this community that they wonder Mr. Rayom's rationale. And frankly, I don't have any other information than what other people have shared with me and they already have for themselves. So I think it's worth a conversation with Tom, and I'd be willing to have that conversation. I've had pieces of that conversation with him, but not to the full extent. But I don't think it's appropriate to say, regardless if you call me for or against, I'm still going to make up my own mind. You still need to take people's perspectives and opinions to heart, and they should impact your informed decision. I mean, the decision is not just, this is how I feel about it and I'm going to make that decision. It should be an informed decision. And people, when they share their opinions, oftentimes have a bit of information to share. Whether it's always 100% based on fact or opinion, at the end of the day, people want to be heard and they should be listened to.
Okay, we'll go to the phone lines again for another caller. You're on the air with the mayor. Hello? Okay, let's try. Okay, there we go. Okay, you're on the air with the mayor.
Oh, you went right by me the first time.
You just missed, Bill.
Okay, I'm on now. Anyways, I'm surprised at Rayon's statement to say that, but I'm not surprised at his vote because he is being very consistent. He did not vote for them coming in the first time, Aspirus, and I think his vote is good, consistent, but I don't think it's politically correct to say I don't care how many calls I get, I'm still going to vote the way I want to. But anyways, I wondered if the mayor could just talk a little bit about the airport budget coming up for the different municipalities, and maybe publicly invite any other municipality that wants to do some kind of payment in kind to help out our airport. Not that we're in dire straits, it's just the idea to advertise our airport.
Bill, thanks for the question and the comments too. Obviously you serve, so you have to make decisions and weigh those comments that you get from public to make your decision as well. Specifically,
definitely. I mean, a good example of that was on the county board when we just made the decision to have a referendum. Do we make the decisions for our people, or do we give them an opportunity to do it in a referendum? And whether I was for or against any of the referendums, I would certainly to give the constituency of Wood County or any city or something, the right to voice their own opinion on that in a referendum.
Yeah, in particular, the issues that you raised regarding the county board, I think it's important that the county board does take a flavor. They don't have any real power in the ultimate decisions but it's important to inform, as was reported, I think, by the newspaper regarding minimum wage and the Badger Care Medicaid expansion, to hear the public's opinion on this, because there hasn't been real, there's public opinion polls, but they haven't heard from the voters. So there are appropriate uses for referendums, definitely.
And then one thing, when the slaughterhouse came through, municipalities, including the town of Grand Rapids, and I believe the village of Buren. I don't know this for sure, but anyways, there was referendums out there, and the people got to vote, and the vote to me was quite surprising.
Sure.
Okay,
I'll take your comments off the air. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
Well, referendums are always based on turnout, too, so we got to make sure that we evaluate to the extent of turnout as a factor.
Bill's a question on the airport.
So we're in annual budget process, and we can talk more about the city's budget process here when we're done with talking about the airport. Definitely, the airport is going through its annual budget process, just like municipalities and others that are on an annual budget, sort of calendar year budget cycle. The airport tree cutting is complete. I'm going to talk about that for a second, just because I think that still bears repeating. People may have questions about that. The revenues were sent to the airport for future improvements. There are many projects related to the golf course that's going to be built down to the south of the airport, and there's going to be some expensive capital improvements. I mean, anything you talk about at the airport isn't the tens of thousands, it's often the hundreds of thousands, and in this case with future runway improvements in the millions of dollars to rebuild those things and reconstruct them for the future. So the revenues are intended to be used to supply the local cost share of those projects, and instead of having to go back to municipalities and say, town or city, we need some more money to fund this airport improvement in addition to the operations. So the plan was to retain those earnings, or those the revenues from the timber sale cut in particular, to save that for future improvements that are going to happen at the airport. As it relates to the airport operations budget, presently the town of Grand Rapids, the city of Nakusa, the village of Port Edwards, and the city of Rapids are equal owners based on equalized value, and they contribute such based on what their equalized value of each municipality is. To Bill's point, we and the county is also a small contributor to the airport, not on a formula like the other ones are. But it's an equal formula between Marshfield and Rapids. As it relates to the village of Buren, namely, I will mention them, that we very much invite them to the table. They've just opened their business park, and there's no question that any large industrial user that may expand there may need airport services. I mean, just last week there were 3 jets sitting at the airport.
I noticed that.
Very large jets, right?
I noticed they were.
You see them when they're sitting there, and they're loud when they leave and come in. But actually, they were associated with a village of Port Edwards business and company with ERCO, and I'm not to say that because the city didn't get any direct, we don't have the businesses in our boundaries, that we shouldn't support the airport. I mean, that's short-sighted, and I think the village of Buren, it's time for the village of Buren to step up to the plate and contribute, whether it's cash contribution like municipalities do today, or an in-kind. Bill talked about maybe an in-kind. It could be the operation of the snow removal equipment. We've been put on notice that our snow removal provider previously, Hazley's, has sold, as many people in the community know. They are no longer in a position to do our snow removal at the airport. And if you don't remove the snow, you can't land planes. You can't land planes. Business doesn't go on in the community. And those planes land at Stevens Point or places like Mosinee. So there are opportunities, I think, for the village of Buren to step up to the plate.
Have you talked to President Evenson about this?
Yeah, on a number of occasions about it. And I think it's time for their board to weigh in. I think they need a resolution. They need to decide if they want to join. If they can't contribute capital based on their equalized value formula this year, when can they contribute? And it's already been reported that they've got at least one tenant in the Buren Business Park, and I understand there's a payback that has to occur with that, with the infrastructure investments there, but really a contribution to the airport is minor in the grand scheme of budgets. When we look at what the municipalities in the area contributes, in the thousands of dollars and in the low thousands of dollars.
We got to take our first break, and then I want to continue with our budget discussions. You're listening to The Morning Magazine on AM 1320, as well as on the web at WFHR.com. It's brought to you by Comfort Air.
Good morning, and welcome back to The Morning Magazine. presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thanks again, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. We also welcome Jesse, our buddy from River Cities Media. He's digitally recording us. And again, there's a rose here between the mayor and I. There's no symbolism here. It's left over. Tammy G's husband left her a little morning present. And we appreciate the fact that she's letting us enjoy the view as well. So,
as warm as it is in here, Carl, it hasn't started to wilt.
That's good. That's good. Hey, how you like warmth after some of the cold we've had and the head cold I was suffering? But we talked, and the phone lines are open, folks. 424-2600 pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone, and you may want to weigh in, especially on the next topic. It's budget time, and this is where the city determines its spending priorities, what it should be spending money on, and this is when you really need the public's input. People say, why isn't the city doing this, or why is it doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the budget process started about a month ago when departments had assembled their requests. Essentially, they fill out budget worksheets, and those then get forwarded on to the finance director, and he assembles the budget. Because there's so many complex revenue streams, the budget has to fit within certain parameters. Not only does it have to fit in within expenditure restraint, which is the state's law about how much we can expend on a given year based on the amount of revenues and other things we have, but there's also levy limits and how much we can levy, how much new taxes can we levy, and there's a limit in there related to that as well. And then there's all the fees that we allocate, whether it's municipal court fees and fines, whether it's a sewer utility fee, whether it is any other fee that residents may pay. So it's not just the taxes that we collect. Only about 43% of local property taxes that people pay. So if people pay whatever that city portion is on their tax bill, goes obviously to the city, and it's only a fraction of everybody's tax bill. Only 43% of our total budget is funded via those allocations. The rest comes through fees and other revenue sources, and then the state kicks in what they call shared revenue. So out of our state tax portion, everybody pays their state property taxes, state income taxes. A portion of that comes back to municipalities through what's called shared revenue, and that's been contentious because the governor always balances the budget, and one of the things he looks at is how much do we give back to other units of government. And by freezing all of those things, we had a freeze in shared revenue, we had a freeze obviously in levy limits, but costs continue to go up, and whether it's wages, whether it's benefits such as health insurance, so the better we're able to keep those costs in line, the better off we are to be able to keep doing what the city does every year.
The Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance has made reference to this many years, that the Wisconsin system for doing this, sending money first to Madison and then sending it back to, is a little bit crazy, and we really need to modernize.
It's very political, right?
Yeah,
it's very political.
It becomes very political.
You've got the legislature and you've got the governor who pitches a budget, and they've got priorities. Mm-hmm. Well, those come in conflict with the responsibilities and expectations of the local units of government. So if it's building roads or putting in power lines or water, those expectations still remain regardless of what dollar figures come. So really the budget is more than just a planning document. It's also your limitations. It's how much you can do. While people may question or complain about government spending, know that the local government is probably the most squeezed and the very most, I would say, responsible with taxpayer dollars because they don't have any other options, right? And so we have to balance the budget. We cannot operate on a deficit like the state and the federal government can. We have to present a balanced budget. So budget process will go forward. We have to pass the budget in November, set the levy in November for the tax levy for 2015 before the tax bill and the rolls can be set and tax bills sent out. So I think the opportunity exists today, starting really any time. The budget question is always out there year-round, really. But the next couple of weeks, the finance director will finish assembling the budget and requests, and then we'll start meeting with departments. We've already met with some last week to pare down their requests, because requests always come in greater than what the city has funds to be able to do. So we're paring down about $150,000 of overage and requests. So then we will begin that process in October. The Finance Committee and the Council will get my executive budget in October. At that point, then they'll be able to weigh in on pieces of that budget.
Can you give us an idea what your priorities are going into this year's process?
Well, we're still paying for a rough winter, whether it's exhausting our snow removal surplus that we had accrued over the years, but our streets, you can tell the street surfaces are really have taken a beating, and we're still paying for that. So we're still going to have a strong street maintenance priority in the budget. In fact, a little bit growth hopefully in what we can spend on a lot of the concrete joints and issues that we've faced with concrete streets. Other priorities, some of the same related to economic development. The room tax allocation is always a question, but streets and really that's just general operations. There isn't a lot you can do, when you start looking at what cost of living adjustments you might give for a wage increase, if any. What can you afford, right? If you've got a flat budget in departments and your revenues are flat, meaning the dollars that come in the door, expenses have to remain as close to flat as possible. And so expect the same, as previous budgets.
Okay. What about in terms of, do you anticipate an increase in the city tax rate, or a stable tax rate, or a decrease? Or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, well, it's early to tell because a lot of the revenue streams have not. In fact, just yesterday, equalized shared revenue numbers were released by the state. So that figure has not been plugged in. We did plan for a no increase, which I think is what shared revenue numbers came in at. So I would not anticipate a decrease in the city's tax rate in any future or any situation unless we had a drastic cut in city services. So until that happens, our budget is largely driven by wages and protective services, namely, and then the rest of the pieces, the library and streets and engineering, and public works operations are really the three large facets to our budget.
Are there things the city is doing now that in the future we may have to find alternative ways of doing, or building public-private partnerships to accomplish these things?
Well, there's always opportunities to do that. Whether or not there's political will and the ability to make that happen. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of examples. You could go from everything in the Public Works Department related to garbage collection, recycling, processing, and that. You could go to protective services. And so there's a lot of opportunity. Do I advocate or propose for any of those things? No. Not personally, not until we have to. And so there are opportunities to do those things differently, or not have to do them at all from a city standpoint. Somebody will have to pick up the tab, so it isn't that you just stop doing them and you save a bunch of money. Somebody else has to pick up the tab.
And then you have the Lean Six Sigma initiative in the city.
Right.
The long-term impact of that should be to have more efficient delivery of services and maybe provide you with some savings, or show you how you can maybe consolidate some functions that are now separate.
Right. An easy example of this is cross-departmental pieces in mobilization. I mean, every time we have to move a truck or move a piece of equipment, there's a cost associated with that. And that cost oftentimes gets allocated to a project, but it doesn't necessarily help achieve that project unless you absolutely have to move your equipment to a project site, for example. So there's opportunity there. There's other opportunities, and we'll be talking about them more as we head into the budget process related to department functions. There's a couple of retirements that are coming that we have opportunities to do things differently and maybe not do what we did previously with positions. So those are coming, and expect us to talk about them in October.
Let's get to the phones and let you talk to your constituency. You're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm wondering, we're talking about all cost increases for the city and county and everybody else, but the people with fixed incomes aren't going to be able to keep up with all that. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is the leaf pickup in the fall. We have a truck coming by with two people emptying bags, throwing their bags in the truck, emptying them out, and throwing the bags back on the lawn. Why don't we get a doggone vacuum like other cities have, and make it a lot easier, a lot quicker, more efficient?
Well, and you relate probably to the Village of Port Edwards service that they provide with their vacuum. We've talked about it, and there really has not been any determination there, and I'm not exactly sure why. I know we've talked about it, but that's a good suggestion, and I'll bring it to the Public Works Superintendent to talk about, because he's got a budget that speaks to capital purchases like new equipment or new vehicles. So something we can talk about.
And I see the street sweeper going by. Sometimes you back and forth, up and down the street here, and there's hardly anything on it. I can understand keeping the gutters and the curbing clean, and I think it'd be a lot of responsibility should be put back on the homeowner to see to it that they don't mow their lawn and blow it out in the street and so on and so forth.
There's definitely ordinances that do not, that protect that from happening. The homeowners cannot put those things in the street on purpose or knowingly. But you bring up a point about street sweeper. I mean, the routes. There is great efficiencies that can be gained by looking at our routes, whether it's garbage pickup or recycling pickup routes or street sweeper. They all have a path to get the job done. The question is that path the most efficient and most effective job or path to get the job done? So good suggestions.
The way I see them going, sometimes it looks like job security more than anything else.
Well, and unless we have the information to prove one way or the other, some can say that. It's a very, very valid suggestion.
Well, I would. Sometimes I see them go by here 4 times.
Wow.
And
what street are you on?
Where do you live, sir?
Well, I'm not going to tell you.
No, that's fine.
Not what street? What street?
I live on the west side.
Sure.
Anyway,
okay.
It's not. The thing of it is they ought to take a closer look at that. And also the vacuum thing. That's what I would like to see, and they could do that and make it a lot more efficient.
Yeah, I know one of the concerns was that they were going to suck up something that would destroy the equipment, but how do other municipalities do it? They obviously are able to do it some way without damaging their equipment.
Yeah, well, see if the military's got something to give away, they give everything else.
That's right. Any combat vehicle we want to militarize our police. Sure.
See if they got instead of a tank, get a vacuum.
Right. We'll talk to them. And thank you for this.
Thank you so much for the call.
You bet.
Bye-bye. Okay, that's how easy it is. I got to take one last break, and the phone lines are still open. Those of you who want to get on Over the Back Fence, you're going to have to wait. But you're listening to the Morning Magazine on AM 1320 on WFHR.com. Welcome back to the Morning Magazine in our final segment with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. You still have an opportunity to talk to His Honor at 424-2600 pound 1320 on your U.S. cellular phone. A new business. Let's talk about it.
It's been kind of semi-announced in certain circles. We've long talked about the need for a shoe store. And we've got good news. We've got a shoe store coming to town. In fact, they're going to be opening just in time for Black Friday. So I think about 3,000 square feet, so it's no small store. It's be a pretty large store. Shoe Sensation is the brand that they've got another store in Wisconsin, I think, up in eastern Wisconsin, and then they're national. They've got stores all over the country. So for all of us that struggle to find shoes in town, this will be hopefully a fix to those woes, and I'm glad that everybody that made that happen, that's plausible.
Where is it going to be located?
People know where the Woodlands Shopping Center is in between Shopko and Kops. It's going to be in that area.
Okay. So we welcome them to the community. Yeah.
Right.
I've heard people going, there's no shoe store in town.
Yeah, number one request I get when people talk about retail, and I would agree, and it's hard to find men's shoes and dress shoes and other things in town. There's some options, but very limited options at that. Okay. Bike lanes, that's something that people probably saw as they've been driving around town. There have been a number of bike lanes. I don't know how many lane miles. I don't have that information that have been fully painted, but the plan there is to obviously connect bike lanes to employment hubs as well as the parks throughout the city, and really for the primary purpose of safety of both bicyclists and motorists by giving them a safe space to be able to use the street. It's kind of a concept called complete streets, that streets are not just for motorists, they're also for bicyclists and pedestrians and other people. And not to mention the health and wellness benefits of having an option and promoting an option. Now, just because you put bike lanes in the street doesn't mean they're going to be filled with bikes. No, of course not. But it's a safe place for those that are looking to use that mode of transportation to work or to school or for recreational purposes.
Especially, we have a rather limited season for doing that.
Yep.
So
hopefully, knock on wood, we'll have a good fall. I've been trying to ride my bike to City Hall as much as I can, and the cold mornings is a little bit difficult.
But since you mentioned, we're heading toward the fall. This is the last week of summer officially. But how is the city? You mentioned in the budget. How are we set up in terms of dealing with our next winter financially? Do we have the resources? If we get socked with a lot of snow, will we have the resources to keep streets and highways clean and safe?
Well, we budget for an average winter, which I don't know if any winter is average. So how do you say average? Well, it's a 3-year average of snowfalls. So obviously last winter was very, very tough on our budget in many ways, on our streets and everything else that we're aware of. But from an operations standpoint, everything we can do to maximize the efficiency of routes, as the caller just talked about. Our GIS specialist is looking at how they can remap routes. Well, number one, understand the routes that exist today and how much driving of those routes occurs, to the caller's point, on the street sweeper, because obviously that's lost efficiency and you want to capture that back. But as far as budgetary expenses, we're going to budget like we do in 3-year average. We do have contingency dollars. Obviously we have to carry contingency dollars for purposes such as this or any other disaster or unanticipated occasion that may arise. So that's the story on budgeting for winter and snow removal.
Okay. So we're in good stead there. As you know, I attended the opening of the Beer and Business Park, and that leads. We have a certified site here in the city, and what any news on that site or any others? Are you getting inquiries about from other businesses or companies that may?
Since our last show, there hasn't been any inquiries, and I think part of it is construction season.
It's nearing the
timing
end.
When people start bringing these questions and inquiries, site selection to us. But I will mention, and I think this is something I wanted to talk about as we finish the conversation about the annexation and rezoning topics. In light of some deficiencies and things that the community may have, there are many assets, right? We've got many assets, and they're only assets if we leverage them. And so what we're going through right now, and this is through the REGI group, the Regional Economic Growth Initiative, which is city and county funds as well as some other municipalities that have decided to contribute. Looking at doing, we've actually gotten state support, $50,000 from state to match our contribution of about 40-some thousand to do an infrastructure assessment. And while we're at the very, very early stages, in fact, there's a possibility they'll be in town already next week to begin their work. That's something that will set the stage for county and the city and any other entity to talk in a proactive sense about economic development. Until we know what we've got and know where our gaps and deficiencies are, only can we address the competitiveness or lack of competitiveness our city and towns and villages have. So very excited about the opportunity for that. It's going to be at least a 6-month process for them to do all of their investigative work and then put together a report and go through all the contacts with local businesses.
For our listeners, in terms of infrastructure, what items are we talking about? That's a huge
built infrastructure. Very good question. Built infrastructure. It's the pipes under the street. It's the overhead power lines. It's everything that comes into the city that's related to purely infrastructure, and that's built. There will be some emphasis, though, a review on workforce. There's been a lot of work done on workforce already, so there's no need to recreate the wheel there. There's also a lot of talk about some of the other pieces as it relates to, as we talk to available land and what are the capacities of certain communities, right? So this isn't just a Wisconsin Rapids specific scan. It is looking at all the municipalities and taking a look at even some zoning. What are some inhibitors? Because the company that has been selected to do this does this professionally, right? So they've done this, and their list of municipalities they've done this for is pretty extensive. So we're very pleased that they have a breadth of knowledge. And one of the people on staff is a site selector. What does he work for? He works for companies that you're asking about that are looking at communities to locate.
And one of the big assets, infrastructure assets for any community is internet or their technology, your specialty.
Yeah, right. Well, and taking a look at broadband, we already know that is a terribly best kept secret as it relates to broadband. I hear municipalities that are talking about just trying to get to 1/10 of the speed that Solaris and other providers can provide our area. So there's an opportunity there just simply from a marketing standpoint. But the plan is to take a look at the infrastructure piece and then how can we convert some of those really strong bright spots into a marketing piece.
Okay. Well, Your Honor, this was a very interesting hour. I thank you for the time. I thank our callers for their participation, and we'll see you again next month.
Yeah, invite residents to call or email or stop into the office if they have further questions, or wait till next month.
Okay. And with that, we're going to wrap up today's edition of the Morning Magazine here on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. As always, it's been brought to you by Comfort Air.